Stay up to date on the latest political news this election season for less. Visit inforum.news/port and get 3 months of unlimited access to our news network for only 99 cents a month. Subscribe now at inforum.news/port. Welcome to Plain Talk, and as we've been doing all fall, late summer and fall, is debates with our statewide candidates for all the offices. We've done the U.S. House, we've done Attorney General, we've done a Public Service Commission candidate. Now we're on to Secretary of State, and this is an important race. Obviously, they're all important races. This is an important one. The Secretary of State has a lot of important jobs. Probably the most visible job for the public is managing elections, and gosh, election integrity is a big issue right now, and we're going to get into that. The two candidates, of course, are Michael Howe. He is a state senator. He has served he was first elected in 2016. He is from.
You gave Michael Howe a promotion. He's a
hey, Chad. Hey, now.
That's like $4 a day, right?
What did I say? Did I say he was okay? Well,
you said he was a senator.
Okay, he's a representative. Excuse me. I don't know why my head's on the Senate. Yes, Representative Michael Howe.
Thanks, Chad. I appreciate that.
First ran in 2016. He's from District 22, which is a largely rural area in Cass County. And he is now seeking a term as Secretary of State. His opponent is Democratic candidate Jeffrey Powell. He has a doctoral degree in higher education and student affairs from the University of Northern Colorado. He's worked for 30 years in university and college settings. He is currently at Mayville State University, and before that, worked at the University of North Dakota. And, my first question, because, again, we have had an incumbent, Republican Al Jaeger, who has held that seat since the early 1990s. It's been a remarkable run for Secretary Jaeger, but he's moving on. So for the first time in a generation, frankly, we're going to have a new person in that job. And I think that's my first question for both candidates. And Jeffrey, we'll start with you. Why do you want this job? Why are you running for this job?
Well, as I've consistently said, the reason that I'm interested in being Secretary of State is because I do believe in voting. And one of the things that we have had going on around the country are people who are questioning the integrity of the people in North Dakota whenever we run our elections, people who are questioning the integrity of those poll workers in other states. And I want to make it clear that our voting systems are secure, our voting systems are safe. I want to make sure they stay that way too. And so as somebody who has written a dissertation on how college students become politically active, as somebody who has been politically active, although never been an elected official, I'm looking forward to being in a role where I get to be the umpire who makes sure that our elections stay fair, our elections are safe, and that our election workers and the county auditors are well trained and are doing the right thing.
Michael, that same question to you.
Yeah, well, thanks, Rob. Thanks, Chad. Thanks, Jeff, for participating here today. It's Secretary of State's office. I mean, one thing we've heard the last 2 years, especially all over the country, Secretary of State, you think elections. This job is so much more than that. Chief Election Officer, sure, is the big shining object out there, but you're the front door to every new business. As North Dakota's business climate has been great for 30 years under Republican leadership with low taxes, stable regulation, Secretary of State's office, I feel, can play an important role in that. Streamlining processes, making that process of starting a business easy. When I talk to business owners, many of them have started multiple businesses. Let's encourage that. Let's encourage that growth. I think we can play an integral role in diversifying our economy. I'm running for Secretary of State because I want to preserve and protect our election integrity. I want to make North Dakota the easiest place to start a business, and I want to ensure that our natural resources remain for generations to come. Rob, as you read my bio, was first elected to the House in 2016, re-elected in 2020. I've found out I've enjoyed public service a lot. I like helping others. This is something that was not on my radar at all. And people I respect a lot approached me and said, hey, you should really consider looking at this. Secretary Jaeger's hanging it up. We feel like your skill set would really lend itself to this job. So that's a humbling experience too, when people have the confidence in you to pursue something like this. So after much thought with my wife and my family, we went for it. And it's been a a great time traveling the state here the last few months.
So, as Rob alluded to, Al Jaeger has been in the office for 30 years, and often during campaigns, we focus on things that we would do different in the office. So, I'm going to flip it on its head a little bit. What is something that the Secretary of State's office is doing right that you would continue to advocate to continue what they're doing right? Michael, I'm sorry, that's for you.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I think the way we run our elections here in North Dakota are just fine. We've got a strong voter ID law. We haven't seen massive amounts of voter fraud, really any troubles with the integrity of our elections. I want to keep it that way. They've done a great job working hand in hand with the legislature to maintain that. And that's a feather in the cap to Secretary Jaeger and the staff up there. He's got a great election staff. He's got a great business staff. The people working in that office are true public servants. And it's really a kudos to a team effort with the Secretary of State's office, the legislature, and our county officials too.
Jeffrey, same question to you. What's the Secretary of State doing right?
It is a complex job, and there are lots of things that you need to do. I do think that it's a good thing that Al is being replaced. I think that that time has come, but clearly the 32 years that he's given the state, the extra 4 that he didn't intend to give, that he ended up giving because of the election problems one cycle ago, he is a good public servant. I'm ready to modernize the office. I'm ready to change part of the culture, but he's done okay.
And just that those issues referred to, we had Secretary Jaeger was not had lost the NDGOP's endorsement at convention, but the gentleman who was endorsed ended up having some issues on his criminal record and ended up stepping out of the race. Jaeger re-entered as an independent and was elected to another term. Just to give that backstory for people who don't follow this stuff as religiously as we do. Now, Michael, I know you started out saying that everybody talks about Secretary of State. You think elections. And campaign finance disclosure and all that stuff. But that is an important part. I mean, you said there are other important parts of the job, but that is a very important part of the job. And especially given a lot of the debates we're having nationally right now about election integrity, and even here in North Dakota. Now, recently I wrote a story, and some others covered it as well, about just an influx of people requesting information from the Secretary of State's office. Secretary Jaeger often saying they're requesting things that don't exist. They're being, his office is being accused of like trying to hide things if they don't produce records they don't have. And there's a lot of people who are convinced. You said that our elections in North Dakota have been run very well. I agree with you. But there's a lot of people out there who are convinced that it's not. And so I guess my question for you is, in this environment where so many people are questioning the integrity of our elections, how do you, our state's top election officer, if you were to be elected, how would you restore some of that trust?
Yeah, that's the first thing I've been saying on the campaign trail too, Rob, is we need to gain the public's trust back. People get caught up in the cable news cycle, I believe, and they hear and see things that aren't related to North Dakota. Every state has their own set of election laws. It's our job in Secretary of State's office, working with our partners in every county, highlighting those differences of what we do well. I say pull the blinds up on that entire process. Education will be a very key piece to this. Having public service announcements, inviting the public to view the voting machines, having a behind-the-scenes look as to how your vote is being counted accurately, securely, and in a fair manner are all important things of how do we gain that trust back. Yeah, there's always going to be people discrediting the system. There's always going to be people questioning things. And that's okay to a point. But it's also recognizing what is factual and what is not factual, and recognizing that, hey, North Dakota, we do things here pretty well.
There is a really terrific PDF on the Secretary of State's website that describes step by step how our elections process works. It's great. It's just written in a 1982 version of what information could be. So Michael talked about business services and talked about the website, and First Stop has been a good update. The rest of the website looks like it was built for Alta Vista, but we're going to work on that. There's information that's on the website that can provide the kind of confidence that Michael is talking about, that can describe the way that in our counties before the election, some of the Democrats and some of the Republicans and leadership get together and they view the machines and they fill out fake ballots and they run them in so that we can understand what the count is going to be and how the count is going to be accurate. There are tests that the county auditors are doing, or at least some of the county auditors. The lack of leadership that Al's shown over the county auditors is a concern, and I certainly want to make sure that we are doing things that provide some level of comfort that all 53 county auditors are playing from the same book or doing the same thing. But I know that as a part of the leadership here in Grand Forks County, I've seen the way the machines work beforehand. I've seen the way the machines work afterhand. I have every bit of confidence. And yes, if we could have everybody see that, then that would be grand. But at some point, we need to have Republicans stop saying the elections are rigged, and we need to get out there and we need to say, our leadership has seen this. The results can be trusted.
Well, I just to move on, Michael, obviously it's and I guess the question's for both of you, because we've seen so much about the 2020 election. Just one quick follow up. Do you feel like the election was fair in 2020, both in North Dakota and nationally? Was Joe Biden elected president?
Well, yes, Joe Biden was elected president, Rob. The election was fair in North Dakota. It's hard. It's the election of 2020 was a different cup of tea than we've seen in previous elections. That is where some of the doubt can come from. There were executive orders, people participating in elections in 2018. The process was different in other states in 2020 because of the pandemic. So right there, it could be a key ingredient to why people would cast out. But at some point, you have to win a court case. If you're going to contest the results of the election, you have to win in court. Nobody's won in court. Joe Biden was elected president. I voted for Donald Trump in 2016. I voted for him in 2020. My vote was counted accurately, securely, and fairly here in North Dakota. And we're going to ensure that in 2024, whether you're voting for president, whether you're voting for the North Dakota Senate, your vote's going to be counted accurately, securely, and fairly here in North Dakota as well.
Jeffrey, same question to you.
Well, I didn't vote for Donald Trump in 16 or in 20. Is that the question?
No, no.
To no one's surprise.
No, I didn't either. But Jeffrey, no, I mean, obviously, do you feel our election in 2020 was both here in North Dakota and nationally? You think it was fair?
I believe Michael is exactly right. Every single one of these court cases failed, and they failed for a reason. They are throwing dust at the umpire whenever they are bringing up the idea that there were any election problems. This was fair, and it turned out exactly the way it's supposed to.
I love the baseball idiom. Chad, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to stay on the same sort of topic, because one of my frustrations is, we talk about the Mike Lindell, we talk about that people not trusting the elections, but
people causing mistrust in the elections.
Jeffrey, you're jumping ahead of my question. We had the whole congressional delegation and the lieutenant governor participate in the Stop the Steal rally after the last election. Just this week, we found out the former U.S. attorney, Drew Wrigley, was sending messages to Kevin Kramer, suggesting some things maybe get done to get different electors. Michael, how can people in your party be surprised that folks don't trust the election when it's often leaders of your party who've been sort of sowing that distrust in the process? Right after the election, it's continued for years to come. And it's not just like the Trumpy sort of conspiracy theorists. It's often, sort of the rank and file leaders of the Republican Party.
Well, it's unfortunate that people had that distrust right after the election. And as I alluded to, everything that was happening in the world in 2020, mass mailing of ballots in California, inconsistent signature verification in different states. Think back to that week of election week in November of 2020. We were all being bombarded with different types of information. I can understand where people can get caught up in that. As the dust has settled and the facts have come out, I've campaigned with Drew Wrigley for the last 8 months. He has never said anything of the sort that the election was rigged or stolen. Again, I think once cooler heads have prevailed, the week after the election. And I don't know the timeline of the text or any of the details of the sort. I haven't talked with Drew about that at all. But it's unfortunate that it came to that point, Chad, where people didn't trust our elections. So it's up to elected officials in the Secretary of State's office and our county officials to tell that story, to gain back that trust, as I alluded to earlier.
Here's my writing critique. He's using passive voice. He's making this pretense that the distrust in the cycle just happened. It was fueled, and Chad's question is exactly on cue. How do we get the party that's been creating the distrust to roll that distrust back? Because they're not there.
Well, you want to talk about the party creating distrust. I don't believe Stacey Abrams has conceded the 2018 election in Georgia. Hillary Clinton was also in 2016, not saying there was a fair election in 2016 either. Both people are guilty of this. Both parties are guilty of this, and we need to do better.
Stacey did come out. Hillary has said she thinks that there was some, not election problems, but some campaigning problems that need to be addressed in terms of the way some of the databases may have been hacked. But I don't think this is a 1-for-1 ratio that's going on here, Michael.
Michael, I'll let you respond and we'll move on.
There's not much to respond.
Okay, fair enough.
I think there is a fundamental problem in the United States with losing.
Yeah.
Whether that's been encouraged at the youth sports level, whether it's now been running for public office, there's a fundamental problem with accepting losing.
Let's move on. Jeffrey, you've mentioned a few times about wanting to modernize. You're talking about, you click through to some of the PDFs and it's written in, I would agree, sometimes presented in a it's accurate information, but perhaps presented in a very dated way. One frustration I have as a member of the news media is sometimes accessing like campaign finance reports. I feel like all the information's there. Often it's very clunky. Like sometimes the number you're looking at, like it looks like a cumulative number, but it's not a cumulative number. And sometimes it's really hard to understand what you're looking at. And I look at these reports for a living. So I'm trying to think of like the average member of the public that's maybe trying to get some information on the background of a candidate and they're lost a little bit. So can you talk a little bit about that? What would you do in terms of modernizing, particularly the online stuff for the Secretary of State?
I want to buy a QuickBooks subscription for every single candidate that they are supposed to put their money in the day they get it, and they're supposed to put their expenditure in the day that they spend it, and it's always there. This reporting 3 times a year thing, I mean, I need to sit down and work my way through the Excel sheets because I haven't been keeping a running total. I want it to be live and accurate. I want it to be live, accessible, and accurate. I think that is one great way to bring about transparency. I'm going to stop there for a second. That's the first thing I would do, is to figure out a way to make things more frequently reported and to make things more transparently reported.
Michael, same question to you. Are there things, and obviously some of it, like the reporting guidelines, I mean, that's set by the legislature, but you have, I mean, you can testify to the legislature. You can talk about some of these things. What's your attitude? And I guess maybe with the campaign finance disclosures in general, can we do better?
Sure. I think we can always do better with being more transparent. I think we need to identify the problem first. We've come out when the pre-general reports come out on Friday, and then or pre-general reports. We had the pre-primary reports this summer. It's all there. The under $200 rule is consistent with the federal rules. But sure, if that's the appetite that the public wants, hey, we want live updates as soon as you get that check, I have no problems administering that in the Secretary of State's office. I don't know if it's going to solve any problems or we're going to glean any new information from that. But sure, if that's what they want, of updating exactly what you spend and notifying the state's office, sure, just give us the resources to administer that.
Michael, staying on that same front, one of my frustrations with our campaign finance laws is that all candidates aren't created equal, right? Statewide have to report, as you know, now reimbursement or expenditures. Legislators don't, because it's not a full-time job. And then some kind of PACs have to, report some things. And then multi-candidate PACs, as the governor set up, doesn't have to report expenditures. Would you be supportive of making that uniform where like all candidates, all PACs, all parties are treated equally in terms of what they have to report? Because that's my biggest criticism of the system, is that it's just not equal for everybody.
Yeah, I think there's can be inconsistent rules, and if you've been a candidate and now you're running a multi-candidate PAC, it can be clumsy, and as we've discussed, the website's not user friendly either to use. That would be the first order of business before we go out changing our disclosure laws, making a website that's user friendly to achieve all this stuff, Chad. Yeah, let's if that's the appetite that the legislature and the public wants, disclosing that money, sure. As it relates to the governor's PAC, there's a reason we found out about it, because of the current disclosure laws that's happening. So again, finding the problem, seeking the solution to the problem. I don't know if anything changes there, but being more transparent more often, sure, works for me.
Jeffrey?
I can't say that I know enough about the distinctions between the kinds of reports that you do. I hear what your question is. I don't know that I have a content-filled answer, but I do appreciate the question.
Let's move on. Another area where we've often, in particularly, we struggled with this. I remember back during the oil boom days. One thing that the Secretary of State's office is, as Michael put it, Secretary of State's office is kind of the front door. If you want to open a business in North Dakota, one of the first things you have to do is make a filing, or make some filings, I guess, depending on what you're doing with the Secretary of State's office. But that process has been very slow in the past, or particularly during the oil boom years, and I know that's kind of an extenuating circumstances. We had a lot, kind of a tidal wave of stuff going on. But I think there's been a lot of feeling that, because I remember people running for Secretary of State, a decade ago now, who were talking about a need to modernize that process. So Jeffrey, talk about that a little bit. How do we make it, because I think we all want people to, if you have an idea to open a business, we want that to be an easy and welcoming process. How can we make that better in the Secretary? What are we doing anything wrong, I guess, first of all, and how can we make it better?
So in my day job, I manage multiple pieces of software. I understand how computers work, even though that's not where my training is. The Computer Technology Services, or CTS for NDSU, for NDUS, excuse me, has changed the way that our system looks so that there is a cleaner look, and it has to do with knowing which path you need to go down in order to do things. When I look at the website right now, there's 19 different things that are going on the front page. We can solve that problem by making it cleaner. We can have the ability to hover over a button to find out what that button does. There are pieces of technology that are not new that could be applied to the website right now and make this thing easier to use and better to understand. And as somebody who works with CTS right now, I know that there are folks who can do that, because I haven't spent my life in Bismarck. I don't know all of the players and how that particular piece works, but I do know how to get it done.
Michael, same question to you.
There was the Greater North Dakota Chamber Policy Summit yesterday, and the governor spoke. Toward the end of his remarks, he was speaking about having a uniform business center. He didn't call it business center. I can't remember what the term he used, but he said, when you're interacting with government, you're going to the Game and Fish website, you're going to the Secretary of State's website. Why not make a uniform process across the board? When you go get your deer tag, that information is saved on there. So when you go to the Secretary of State's office, they know who you are. Make it a seamless transition, a seamless process. When you go to Amazon.com, you can go on there and say, hey, this is the last thing I ordered. Do you want it again? It knows your information just like that. We can achieve that. But working with the legislature, partnering with other state agencies, having a seamless transition like that will be the most, I think, responsive way to the taxpayer and what they expect. It's the year 2022. Let's go for it. We can do these things. We don't have to be antiquated. We don't have to be out of date. These are things that will move North Dakota forward. And like I said, make it the easiest place to start a business in North Dakota. We've talked about why so many companies want to come here. We've talked about all the national publications that have lauded our pro-business climate. Now, the first step in doing this and getting your license and having this be a seamless process across the board, maybe I'm nerding out here, but it makes me really excited for the job and so much how just the progress we can achieve here in the Secretary of State's office.
So, Michael, staying on that same front, I think all that stuff sounds great, but the big question is, how do you convince the legislature to do it? I know that in the past, maybe Secretary Jaeger has not been effective at getting the employees he needs and that kind of thing to make the office run more efficiently. So how do you convince the legislature that this is a good place to invest resources, be it staff? And I agree with your assessment of the Secretary of State staff. They're tremendous. I mean, every time I've interacted with them, they've been very good. But how do you convince the legislature that this is a place where we should be investing resources, technology, staff, all those kind of things?
Yeah, Chad, this conversation's been ongoing the last at least 2 bienniums. IT unification. I think sometimes that gets lost over my colleagues' heads sometimes as to what that means and what's the outcome of this going to be. I've got a great relationship with the legislature. I've got friends in the House, friends in the Senate, Democrat, Republican. I feel like that's part of my skill set here. It's a new voice. It's a different person at that podium expressing why this can work, how it can work, how we're going to be efficient with the tax dollars. If the legislature can appropriate this money, I feel like I have a strong skill set to convince them we're going to see results. It's going to be a great investment for the state of North Dakota.
Jeffrey, how do you walk down the hall and get the legislature to invest in the Secretary of State office?
Well, I don't have the friendships. I'm not the career politician here, but I will say that I can make the same argument that this is how we need to set ourselves up for success. And the arguments that Michael makes are exactly correct. If we can't make this a place where people want to come and work, and I will say also come and live, then we are not going to be in the upward spiral we want to be in.
Michael, as a student of body language, I feel like the career politician thing sort of struck a nerve there. Do you have anything to say to that?
I mean, if whatever you got to do, whatever hyper partisan talking points you got to use, go for it.
Let's move on. We recently the Secretary of State's office was in the news over ballot measures, right? That's a big part of the job is obviously administering elections, but we have a process in North Dakota whereby the people can legislate at the ballot box, and the Secretary of State's office is deeply involved in that process, from obviously approving the measures for circulation in the first place, verifying the signatures when they come in. We had a bit of a kerfuffle over a ballot measure to implement term limits, and I guess maybe as two people who are running for office, you could tell us how you feel about term limits, but I don't really want to go down that rabbit hole. What's more interested in me for this race, because by the way, that term limits measure wouldn't apply to this office. It's just the governor and the legislature. But what's interesting to me, and Jeffrey, maybe you can go first, is the Secretary of State initially disqualified that measure from the ballot, saying that there was widespread fraud. The Attorney General tended to agree with the Secretary of State about that. And a district court judge who reviewed the evidence for the state Supreme Court also agreed with it, but the state Supreme Court coming down and finding that the Secretary of State lacked the, authority to disqualify signatures in the way he did. Can you react to that and maybe speak to the Secretary of State's involvement in that process?
I know what I know from the press. I don't have any inside information, but what I understand is that people were going out and getting signatures on a petition, and at some point there were people who said, today's the 29th, not the 28th, and so they wrote the 29th incorrectly, and then later on somebody came along and said, well, heck, I know what day it is, and so they put the 28th. And so now we all know what day we're recording. And so my understanding is there are some signatures that could be perceived as a mistake on the part of the petition signer, not necessarily the petition handler. I think there's probably some good information there that if you are circulating a petition, you need to make sure that you're checking the lines whenever they come in. My understanding is that there was what could be classified as a genuine mistake. and that the Secretary of State's office, and I don't know how much this is driven by law versus how much it was driven by interpretation, struck down all of the signatures that followed the mistaken date on the petition. Is that an accurate understanding from your all's perspective?
Well, it was a bit more than that. There were some questions about whether or not things were properly notarized, which, by the way, Secretary of State's office also regulates notaries. There were some questions about, handwriting. Was the person who was getting their signature notarized, were they actually there, or was somebody signing in? There were a lot of questions there. Obviously, I'm not in a place to I wasn't there when they were notarizing. Right. I don't know. The Secretary of State and the so I guess that's to clarify. It was more than just some I wrote the 27th instead of the 28th. It was quite a bit more than that. Okay.
So I don't know enough about the law. What I do know is that when I have gone out and gotten petition signatures for candidates that are running, that are friends of mine, the people that I believe in, it's probably easy for me to get that kind of mistake would happen. I don't think that the Secretary of State should be in the business of trying to figure out how to exclude people unless there's a legal reason to exclude people. Obviously, we don't want Minnesota people signing petitions for us. I mean, I'm not trying to talk about, doing anything that's clearly against the will of the folks. But I think my concern was that there were a number of things that could easily be considered a mistake as opposed to some sort of malintent. Secretary Jaeger wrote a terrific letter to Tuttle as Tuttle was turning in his signatures to get on the ballot. He indicated what signatures he was taking, what number he wasn't taking. He indicated the reason that he wasn't doing it. It appears to me that in the case of Tuttle, the candidate, he was good and precise and provided clarity to the candidate on what needed to happen before the due date in order to get in. I don't know if that kind of conversation was going on with the folks that were looking for the marijuana or folks that were looking for the term limits, or if they just waited until they plomped them in on the day that they turned them in.
I don't know. Michael, your response to that question.
Yeah. We throw out the term fraud. What does that mean? I think the legislature needs to make a clear definition of the term fraud and fraudulent signatures as it relates to petition gathering. Fraud to me implies that something nefarious was going on. Maybe it was. I don't think we know. I think they were invalid signatures. I don't know. I don't want to deem them fraudulent signatures. But determining what fraud is a key conversation the legislature has to have in conjunction with the Secretary of State's office and the Attorney General's office to figure that out. The Supreme Court case, that was a shocker to me. After we saw at the lower court in their decision, I was really surprised to see the decision 5-0 from the Supreme Court. So what level of fraud or what level of invalid signatures is acceptable? I don't know. I spoke with David Owen, who had headed up the marijuana measure the day after the Supreme Court case. I was up in Grand Forks for an event. We had a long conversation about this. He was very upset about the result. Now, his measure had already been accepted, been placed on the ballot, but he said, Michael, do you know how much time and money we spent on making sure that we were following the law, we were following the rules, and we were sending in valid signatures? He said they had a 91% acceptance rate on their signatures, which is fantastic. Mm-hmm. He said, to me, that Supreme Court case signaled that we didn't have to do that. We didn't have to take the time. We didn't have to spend the money to do all that stuff. So there's a very glaring problem here that the legislature, the Attorney General's office, Secretary of State's office has to address. We've got a great process here. We allow the people to change the Constitution through the petition process. I have no intention on getting rid of that process. But let's make it count for something. Let's not just open the door and say, hey, you want to get 100,000 signatures? If 80,000 of them are invalid, just make sure you have 15,000 of them so you can change century code. It's going to be a very difficult conversation to have. There's not going to be a 2-line sentence piece of legislation that's going to fix this, that's for sure.
Well, one of my frustrations is, so we had the term limits. We also had the chamber change to the constitutional measure that got thrown out. We had a county commission candidate in Burleigh County that got thrown out for fraudulent signatures. But nobody's had any charge in Grand Forks as well, it looks like Jeffrey's saying. But as far as I know, no charges have been filed against any of these folks. It doesn't seem like there's a deterrent there that you can just throw in 50,000 signatures where some segment is, fraudulent, maybe fraudulent, invalid. I think, Michael, that's a fair term. So do you think we need to do a better job of sort of slapping the hands of people who are turning in invalid or potentially fraudulent signatures to stop this from happening?
And if I can just jump in with a little bit of context, the legislature did upgrade one of the from a misdemeanor to a felony after in 2012. Actually, it was another ballot measure to legalize recreational marijuana. There was a group of petitioners who were paid to collect signatures. A number of them, by the way, NDSU students and football players. I don't know if people remember that. But the legislature did upgrade that charge from a misdemeanor to a felony. Sorry, I just wanted to add that context. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Man, I got lost. I appreciate Michael's comment. I appreciate Chad's comment on the idea of finding that line somewhere between fraud and something that just happens. I do think that distinction is important. I don't know what the penalties are. I do know that whenever I collect signatures and I take them to the courthouse because I'm helping a friend run, that there is a process where I'm making the statement that I did this in good faith. And so I do think it's important that we remember that people of good faith are out there trying to affect our politics. We want to make sure that we honor that. I don't know that I want to get into a place where we say, go collect 100,000 with the hope that 15 of them are good. I think that's not respectful to the system. I don't know what the legal ramifications are or should be. And part of this is when you have a part-time legislature, there's only so many things that you can have in law before the thing happens. And so I think we now have some attention on this.
I guess maybe that question to Michael, do we need to put more teeth in the law?
I'm sure there will be efforts this legislative session. I don't know if it's the Secretary of State's role to weigh in on what a penalty is. I think that's probably more suited for the BCI and its AG's office and the county state's attorneys. But I think if there is, again, getting back to the question of valid and fraudulent, we need to determine what the definition of fraudulent is and make sure that's concrete and locked down before we start increasing penalties on this. So we're not throwing the book at someone that made an honest mistake, because those do happen.
With the with the example that I mentioned, those people were like copying names out of the phone book and writing them down. Right. That to me meets the definition of fraudulent versus maybe somebody didn't put their full address down or got the date wrong, as Jeffrey alluded to. To me, that's probably invalid.
I've had folks that are, six people in a group and 5 of them are from North Dakota and 1's from Minnesota because we're right across. And, they all sign. And that's
a mistake. That's not fraud.
Right. But also, too, to that point, if there needs to be some personal responsibility with the petition gatherers. You can't just stand outside the state fair and ring a bell and say, everyone come sign this. Well, there's got to be some personal responsibility to explain what the measure is. Ask that person who's grabbing the pen to sign the signature page, are you a resident of the state of North Dakota? That whole process needs to, I don't know if there needs to be a change in state law. But it just, do the right thing.
To Michael, I don't want to get to a point where they're just submitting just mass amounts of signatures and it's up to the state authorities to just find all the problems. I mean, there should. I think to Michael's point, it feels like there should be an expectation that they're getting it right and they're following the law. And if they're not, there should be a consequence for that. All right, let's move on. One of the other duties of the Secretary of State's office, and maybe a lot of people don't talk about this, is sitting on the board of university and school lands. And I realize that probably sounds super boring, but I assure you it is super important. The board of university, as particularly after the oil boom, when suddenly a lot of those lands, those mineral rights that the state has been managing, were suddenly worth a lot more money than they were in the past. Michael, there's been some lawsuits over the board of university, some disagreement, particularly with regard to mineral rights under Lake Sakakawea. There's been a lot of issues like that out there where the state has been sort of fighting over those mineral rights. Speak to that role of the job a little bit and how you would approach it, and if there's any change in the way that board goes about its business that you think should take place.
Well, if you talk about change, the makeup of the board is changed dramatically here now in the last 3 or 4 years.
The board, by the way, is Governor Burgum's, the Secretary of State, currently Al Jaeger, the Superintendent of Public Instruction, Kirsten Baszler, the State Treasurer, Thomas Beadle, and the Attorney General, Drew Wrigley. Wrigley, Beadle, and haven't been there that long, and the Secretary of State's about to change. One of you two gentlemen will be in that seat. Michael, sorry, didn't mean to interject.
Yeah, no, thanks for explaining that, Rob. And a new land commissioner too was just appointed earlier this year. So the talk about changes, there's going to be new personalities, new ideas, new thoughts and views on all that. I think the role sitting on the land board, you have to have a delicate balance. You have to look out for the best interests of our public education system, while also looking out for energy development, agriculture development, striking that balance of, hey, we need those two industries to succeed, to fund our priorities, not giving one advantage to the other. That's going to be a challenge. We all know how important oil and ag have been to our state. We also know it's our responsibility to fund our trust lands and fund the trust to ensure that we've got funding for our education system, and striking that right balance through the policies that the board sets forward. That would be my main goal, of striking a 50-50 balance of advocating for both.
Jeffrey, that same question to you. Board of University and Trust Lands, obviously kind of a complicated part of the job, but your thoughts on doing that job?
Well, Michael earlier alluded that he was a geek, so here's where I get to remind folks that the Land Grant Act comes about as a part of the 1862 Morrill Act, which was passed in order to provide states with land which they then controlled so that they could provide college educations to their population. So this is something that happened before we were a state, the notion that states were going to be given this. I go to committee meetings. I understand how to follow the mission of an institution, how to follow the goals of what we're trying to accomplish. I don't know the specific elements of mineral rights versus overland rights. I mean, I understand what we're talking about, but I don't know the specifics in terms of what we currently negotiate or what we currently control. But I'm a quick study, and I'm going to be good at that. Michael is right. There is a balance that we need to strike here. We need to make sure that we're respecting the environment. We need to make sure that we are providing to our education system the funds that they need. We need to make sure that we are doing what is best for the families in North Dakota. And we need to make sure that we have a sustainable, energy-related, energy-driven industry. So he's spot on.
And I think Michael's point about balancing public education with energy development, I don't think people realize what percentage of state funding of public education comes from the School Lands Trust Fund. It's most of it, most of the per pupil payment. So that's a really big deal.
Are you talking about the Common Schools Trust Fund? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
I have right here. I mean, right now it's paying, well, in 2019, 2021 biennium, $366 million distributed per pupil. That worked out to about almost $1,600 per pupil.
Yeah, and you think about that's not coming from the general fund, and that allows taxes to stay lower while funding education. Another board that the Secretary of State sits on is the Emergency Commission, which, frankly, I will be honest, I didn't really know the Secretary of State was on the Emergency Commission until all that federal money started flowing in the state, and I was like, oh, Al Jaeger's there. Tell us about, what do you think the role of the Emergency Commission is? I know it's become somewhat controversial with the legislature not wanting the Emergency Commission to spend too much money, but is there anything on the Emergency Commission that you guys are excited to work on? Jeffrey, we'll start with you. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was going to jump in and say I'm really excited to hear Michael Howe, a former member of the legislature, because that's been a dispute between the legislative branch and the executive branch over distribute. But Jeffrey, we'll start with you.
And I also look forward to hearing about the conflict. This will be exciting. Clearly, there are times whenever we get an allocation from the federal government because there has been some sort of disaster. Clearly, there are times when the emergency board is going to need to act in ways that shore things up again. I'm part of the group that is managing the COVID funds that our institution got. I understand the idea that there are some limitations that will come with those sorts of funds, but I also understand that this is the chance to really promote something that you've been needing to do and haven't had the funds to do. The Emergency Commission is one of those things that's going to it will be an environment in which I will thrive, and it's an environment in which I'm looking forward to working, because I want to make sure that whenever we do get that sort of emergency need identified and that emergency need filled, that we have a chance to respond.
Michael?
Everyone's on the edge of their seat now as they're waiting for me to talk. First, the legislature has the checkbook. I think that's a perspective I will take coming from the legislature, moving to the executive branch. So we'll keep that in mind first and foremost. The Emergency Commission does serve a purpose. The legislature did change the law that the budget section can amend the Emergency Commission requests. That just happened for the first time. I believe that was our last budget section meeting. And I talked to Secretary Jaeger after that meeting. He said, this has never happened before. And he had to write a letter to notify Legislative Council and OMB of the change from the Emergency Commission. So things like that, I could tell Al was excited that day because it's something that never happened in his career. But talking about changes to the land board, Rob, look at the Emergency Commission. The Emergency Commission, for the listeners at home, it's the governor, the Secretary of State, House Majority Leader, House Appropriations Chairman, Senate Appropriations Chairman, Senate Majority Leader. 5 of those 6 people are going to be gone next session. So talk about a whole new change in attitudes on the Emergency Commission too. I feel like I can bring that strength, bringing the executive branch to team up with the legislative branch. I'm on the Appropriations Committee. We're de facto appropriating on the Emergency Commission. I've got relationships with state agencies already, and they're going to come to the Emergency Commission asking for these requests. Whoever the new majority leaders are, appropriations chairman are, I'm going to have that built-in relationship, and hopefully we can. There's a lot more 6-0 votes as opposed to 4-2 votes like there have been in the past.
Can I shift gears and let's talk about politics for a minute? And one thing that I've really enjoyed about this debate is we have focused, I think, on some very pertinent issues and had some sharp disagreements. But so much of politics right now is ugly, and it feels like you either agree with me or you're a terrible person. It feels like that's just kind of the position a lot of people are in across the political spectrum. Talk about your approach to campaigning, Michael, in this environment that has gotten, is partisan the right word for it? Divided, factional. I don't know what the right term is for it. The writer here is at a loss for a term, but it's hard. It's difficult. Talk about campaigning in that environment and staying focused on issues that matter to voters.
I announced my campaign at the end of January, and I've been in all different types of environments since then. We had the North Dakota Republican District Convention circuit all winter through the spring. Now through this summer, going to community events, meeting with different organizations. The temperature is very hot. People are upset, and I think there's an appetite for people. They want to be angry. The old notion, politics is local, not anymore. I think through COVID, with everyone sitting at home, they're on the internet, they're watching cable news, hearing information, selective information that's not really necessarily happening in North Dakota, but someplace else. So they don't know these people. They don't know the scenarios. So it's easy to say, I don't like that. It's been my perspective on the campaign trail to try to bring it back home. Talk about the good things that are happening in North Dakota. Talking about the good representation you have here right now. But also recognizing we're not perfect in North Dakota either. And trying to find common ground as to how we can move together and move forward to address those challenges. If people have the appetite to want to listen, and if they have the appetite to really want to advance North Dakota forward, my conversations have been great. There have been conversations, though, that have been not so kind. And that's just like you said, Rob, that's the political environment we are in today. But cooler heads, I think, seem to prevail And that's what I think I bring to the table is a calm, cool head, not try to overreact, not jump at the opportunity to be outraged. And I think that's how you develop the best policy. Politics ultimately leads to policy, and that's what we're all here for. That's what I hope we're here for.
Jeffrey?
So I have two very different kind of responses whenever I'm out talking with folks. And so when I'm out with some of the legislative candidates and knocking on doors with them, I'm hearing this thing, the problems with daycare, the problems with accessing daycare, the problems with property taxes, none of the stuff that I'm going to get to control, but are clearly being controlled right now in a way that aren't meeting the needs of folks. And that has to do with the way that our legislature is structured, and it's so heavily dominated by one of the two parties. I will say that there are folks that are very issue oriented, and those are local issues that are driving that part of the conversation. On the other hand, a good number of conversations that I'm having are all about the Supreme Court's decision to restrict personal freedom, that the legislature passed the law, the trigger ban, and basically is controlling people's rights, even though the vote went the other way 8 years ago. And so there are people that are angry, and I would say righteously angry, because their freedoms are being taken away, and they see the same thing potentially happening with the votes. And so I think that there are two very different responses. I do think that Michael is correct in assessing that part of the anger is coming from the national environment, not from the state environment. But the state also has some obligation to respond to the needs of folks in a way that they haven't.
So one difference between a legislative race and a statewide race, I think often is in a legislative race is candidates get to know their voters in a lot closer way, right? Obviously 47 times as many voters in a statewide race. And so obviously there's a statewide audience here. I think, I would like people to get past voting DNR, but instead vote for the person and who they are. And often that has to do with, sort of your values and that kind of thing. So starting with you, Michael, what would you want the voters to know about you as a human being who's running for this office and potentially representing the state of North Dakota in a lot of different environments?
Yeah, thanks for that, Chad. I know both of you. Jeff's gotten to know me, but I kind of fail to forget sometimes we got a statewide audience that doesn't know exactly our backgrounds. Fifth generation North Dakotan, lived here all my life, went to Central Cass High School, public education system, went to North Dakota State University. After college, was fortunate enough to work and get an experience in Washington, D.C. for 2 years. Moved back, did policy work, communication work, for North Dakota Corn Growers Association. And then after that, went back to our family farm operation and have been there. And then in 2016 was asked to run for the state legislature by my predecessor. I've been elected and reelected by the people that know me best, my friends and neighbors in District 22. I think you would talk to most of them, and they would say, I'm a fair, honest, level-headed guy that wants the best for the state of North Dakota. I love this state. I think we've got tremendous leadership, Republican leadership. We also have good leaders on the other side of the aisle too that want the best for the state of North Dakota. Finding the way to get there, working together. That's my goal. I'm not coming into the role as Secretary of State or a statewide official with a massive personal agenda. I want what's right for the state of North Dakota. I'm pursuing this because I have an opportunity to be in public service. It's not something I want to do for the rest of my life. I was just married on New Year's Eve. My wife and I don't have any children yet. I hope those are coming. But I've got the time and the availability to do this, and I would be honored to have the people of North Dakota's vote and representing them and doing this job for them.
Jeffrey, running statewide is difficult. It's even more difficult when you're running as a Democrat, frankly, in North Dakota. What do you want the voters to know about you and how you would represent North Dakota on this bigger stage?
So I'm a terrific advocate. I have worked with college students for 30 years. I do my best to make sure that people have access to the resources they need and understand the goals that they have to help flesh that out. I'm generally kind, but I'm also able to be a little bit direct whenever there is a need that needs to be filled. like Michael, I am married. My wife and I have been married for 28 years, and we've got 3 kids, and we're trying to get an empty house, but it's just not working out that way. But they are still in college, and so they've decided that living with us is better than living with other students, which is really odd. I care about people. I care about doing a good job. I care about making sure that government does what it's supposed to do, and that's to make sure that we have justice, that we have good tranquility, that we have the kind of environment where people are going to thrive.
Well, I think we've used up all our time, gentlemen. I appreciate you both being on. One thing, when Jeffrey was asked to talk about himself personally, one thing he didn't mention is that it's his birthday today, and he shared part of his birthday with us.
Happy birthday, Jeff!
So that was great. Chad suggested that I was going to sing happy birthday to Jeffrey.
Yeah, Rob's going to sing a solo happy birthday here to bring this thing to an end.
That's not going to happen. But I will say happy birthday, Jeffrey. Thank you for being on. And we'll end it there. Gentlemen, thank you both for your time. I feel like it was a very good conversation. Certainly looking forward to the debate continuing as this race goes on.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.